Greetings, Legionnaires! Today we're going to talk about a game that I've been waiting for a long time, because today we are reviewing and discussing... Now, before we get into it, I kind of want to talk about my background with this franchise, just for a moment. I loved the first Darksiders. It was a game that really spoke to me on a lot of levels. I didn't really play a lot of Zelda growing up, so it had those kind of dungeons in there where they'd give you a new tool to progress through them, and I enjoyed those for what they were, but it was the art style and the combat that really brought me in. It just really grabbed me and just like pulled me into that world. And then Darksiders 2 basically took all of that and cranked it up to 11. And it was really fascinating to me because not only did I enjoy the story, which there was a pretty good amount of, but the characters that really just kind of leapt off the screen to me. It felt like I was playing a comic book. And for those not familiar with the first Darksiders, basically you play War, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and you are charged with abruptly or inadvertently starting the apocalypse a little too early and basically crushing all of mankind. So basically Earth has become this hellscape where demons and angels alike are fighting over it, and you're kind of thrown in the middle. Death takes part in the second one, and he actually is kind of on a journey to help save his brother by basically resurrecting all of humanity and kind of protecting him. So that one kind of takes place parallel or kind of in the middle of Darksiders 1, because Darksiders 1 is like a 100-year jump in there, so Darksiders 2 kind of takes place in and amongst that too. Not only, that stuff is like being a horseman, getting to ride your horse and stuff, especially in Darksiders 2, they give it to you right off the get-go is Death and Despair. You just start off with it. It's so good. In Darksiders 2, though, you do get loot, which is a little different. Wasn't as big a fan of that because I kind of enjoyed, powering up my personal weapon in the first game with Chaos Eater, War's big sword, his big two-handed crazy claymore. But yeah, playing as Death, he is probably one of my favorite video game characters of all time. I love his style. I love his look. I love how he acts. I love how he fights. He is just basically everything I love. Just fast, quick. Traversal options were wonderful as well. But anyway, so it's kind of like this franchise that had this Zelda-esque kind of dungeons and stuff with these puzzles, but also this kind of more over-the-top combat. But now we're here at Darksiders 3, and it's something that we thought we might never get because THQ crumbled, and Vigil Games, who was underneath them, was all gone. But it got swept up and then rebranded into THQ Nordic, and now we're back with Gunfire Games, which some of those guys came from the first game, a lot of them did. And now we can talk about this. So Darksiders 3, what the heck is going on in this one? Before we jump fully into it, I just want to spoil alert everybody. Spoiler warning, if you haven't played this game, I'm going to talk about it, so just get ready for that. But if you don't care about that, then just keep watching. So basically you play as Fury, and the Charred Council, the people who are basically the ones in charge of keeping the balance between the angels and the demons, they've charged you with going out and kind of taking out the 7 deadly sins, which have taken actual monstrous form and are on Earth right now. This is during that time, that 100-year period where War had started the apocalypse, and in between that until he goes back and tries to figure out who's behind all of it. So you have that going on. So the Charred Council's there, and you play as Fury, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, one of the Nephilim, which, just briefly, Nephilim, the mixture of both angel and demon, and they basically were wiped out by the 4 horsemen because the Nephilim were going around destroying every living thing in the universe. So Fury, Death, War, and Strife banded together, got powers from the Charred Council, and to prevent that, they slaughtered all their brothers and sisters. So we have this interesting dynamic here where I kind of wish we could see them play off each other, but because each game seems to be completely separate as far as the 4 horsemen actually working together, you're playing as just Fury this time. So you're going to Earth, going to destroy these 7 deadly sins and maybe try to find out what's going on in the interim. But you were also tasked with kind of dealing with this Watcher type character. This happened in the first game too. The Charred Council kind of sends an entity along with you to watch your every step and make sure you're in line. But unlike the first Watcher, like in the first Darksiders, that was played by the one and only Mark Hamill, excellent. This one is a little more kind of in awe of you, apparently. A lot of the times, very much, oh, mistress, you did this, or oh, mistress, you did that. So, yeah, but you play as Fury. Fury wants to be the leader of the 4 horsemen, kind of hungers for power a little bit, but, goes to Earth to figure all of this out. So, there you go. Tiny, go through the story spoilers pretty quickly here. 7 deadly sins, they're fine. They weren't anything super crazy to me. The big twist at the end, obviously, is that the Watcher is actually Envy, and that she took her place earlier on, and you end up fighting her at the very end of the game. And she kind of has all the powers of your brothers. She has 4 arms, so she's got 2 guns. She's got Mercy and Redemption, the guns that Strife wields. She has a big sword, and she kind of fights like war a little bit, and then she has a scythe that she kind of throws out like death. Yeah, and also you kind of figure out along the way, like, what's going on, and that there's a conspiracy against the Horsemen. It didn't really feel, I don't know, earned, maybe is the word. It just kind of pops up for some odd reason. They're like, oh, like the 7 deadly sins, like once in a while, like Lust will be like, there's a reason. Like there's something going on here that you don't really truly understand, like why Earth is like at the center of all this, what's going on. And that's maybe the best part of the whole story is when you go to fight Lust, because you do get a brief moment where you get to see all 4 horsemen together, even though it's only a vision. It is kind of quick, and it's not the greatest, but at the same time, seeing them all together for just a second had me excited. And then after that, you find out that later on at the very end of the game, that one of the refugees, because there's some humans still around that you kind of save from time to time. You like see a human, you'll hold out this talisman, they'll touch it, and they'll get ported back to a safe area where Ulthane, the Black Hammer, he's like a giant dwarf, as it were, but he is a maker, and he is actually protecting humanity. And he was in the first game. He gives you, I believe it's Mercy, I want to say, is the quad barrel gun that he gives you in that game. And you end up fighting alongside him, taking out some angels together, because angels in this world are not all good, and not all demons are the most evil, but yeah, that's just how it goes. Anyway, but the leader of the human resistance happens to be Strife, which was kind of like, oh, okay. At the very end, they're like, it's actually Strife, because he pulls out these guns and he starts shooting them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, are those Strife's guns? And then he like shows his true form. It's like, why wouldn't you just tell Fury earlier on? Like, I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure if they make a 4th one, they'll figure all that out. But for the most part, the story has never been a super strong point of these games. I've always enjoyed it to the extent that it's there. But this one seemed the weakest of the bunch just because it seems almost inconsequential. Like, Fury's just taking these things out, these 7 deadly sins, and it's just kind of like, yep, you took them out and you're trying to get them for the council, and yep. But there's also a conspiracy. It just seems kind of weird. Also, Fury kind of goes through like some sort of emotional change throughout the game. It seems a little rushed and not super earned. Like she keeps talking about feels like she's changed and she doesn't necessarily want the things she wanted before. So, sure, yeah, I guess you're trying to flesh out your character, which I will say Fury is probably one of the best parts of this game. I love her voice acting. I think she is a cool character, and I like that they kind of focus on her and have her talk a bit more than the other horsemen, because War in the first game is almost a mute. Death doesn't say as much either, but I liked having her talk a little bit. I will say this, one little gripe, but they did not get the same voice actor. I don't think for Death, he has like one line and one thing, but he's a vision, so it's like, okay, all right, I see what you did there. Bothers me a lot. But yeah, that is pretty much the story there. The other big thing is that you don't ever get to ride a horse, or at least I didn't in my playthrough. You are a horseman, and she even has a moment when she's talking to the Watcher, and she says to her, a horseman is not defined by a horse. Yeah, you are. I know it's a semantics thing, but seriously, one of the biggest parts of these games is getting your horse, especially in the first game when you finally get Ruin back, because when you're playing as War, you see that Ruin has gotten a new master. Like, somebody took Ruin. There's a new master for Ruin, and it bothers me. And once you get Ruin back and you kill this guy, and there's a really cool scene where you really mess this guy up. You get Ruin back, and you're able to take on stronger enemies. You are way stronger when you're on your horse. When you attack, you really do a lot of damage. And that was something that they missed out on. And I'm like, Yeah, so they killed off Rampage, which was your horse. And I kept thinking they were going to resurrect him, but they never did. And it was like, missed opportunity. So, yeah, that's a mark against you. You shouldn't be playing a game where you're one of the 4 horsemen and you don't ride a horse. No. Just no. I'm sorry. No. Yeah. Let's get into the highlights and the shortcomings. So let's start with the highlights. Highlights of the game. I like Fury a lot. Fury's a cool character, like I said before. Some of the visuals, the characters do really pop off the screen. They don't look as good as some of the older designs, and they kind of tried to make some photorealistic areas too. But if you look back at Darksiders 1, and more so Darksiders 2, because Darksiders 1's kind of drab and kind of post-apocalyptic, but Darksiders 2 really has fun with its areas and lots of different cool zones and things that are really fleshed out and feel like you're in a comic book once again. It feels like a graphic novel, which that's kind of Joe Madureira, the artist behind those games. That was kind of his style, and he was the guy who came back and ended up doing the design for Fury. But that's about it. But the other characters, Vulgrim's back. I love Vulgrim. He's the merchant. He looks fantastic. The Lord of Hollows, the guy who's giving you your various power-ups through the game, he's pretty cool looking too, which I will say this as well. Your Hollows, which are your kind of magical items you get throughout the game, are pretty neat. They're kind of like your Zelda items, as it were. You get 4 of them. You get one for fire, thunder, force, and ice. Basically, all of those come with a cool different ability. They all come with like a different jump. So for instance, with the fire one, when you equip it, your hair turns orange, and if you have ice, it's blue, lightning, it's yellow, and then force, it's purple, which is nice. That one's really fetching, I think. But yeah, you get different jumps with it. So with the fire one, you get to do a kind of like a burst jump up, which helps you get to higher areas. The lightning one allows you to float. The ice one allows you to walk on water, which is pretty cool, and then do those kind of Prince of Persia jumps between walls that are there, kind of out in the world for you. And the force one allows you to kind of turn into like this black hole with rocks around you, and you can latch onto certain walls and kind of follow this certain path. They all come with their own specific weapon as well. With the fire one, you get nunchucks. With the lightning one, you get a spear. With the force one, you get a hammer. And then with the ice one, you get a lance. Or no, sword. It's a sword. That's what it is. So the lightning one is the lance and spear. The sword is the last one. I like the ice sword. It comes a little late, though. Sometimes it happens in games where they give me a cool item later. And because this game is much more of like a Souls style of power-up, style of like weapons, I kind of already put all my points into the lightning spear or the lance, which I really enjoyed. Highly recommend you use that one. Really good damage and really fast too. So that was kind of my weapon of choice. Those were pretty cool. I enjoyed those, and obviously you have your whip, which your Barb of Thorns, and that's kind of like your main damage dealer. It can be pretty good. It can be a little frustrating sometimes to wield it properly, because sometimes you think you're going to hit multiple people and sometimes it doesn't. You're like, but yeah, that's definitely a highlight. The combat can feel good at times. There are moments where it feels great, and that's about it for the highlights. This is going to start to take a turn, and I'm so sorry, because Darksiders is one of my favorite franchises. But let's get to the shortcomings. Let's stick with combat for a second. Combat, and this whole entire game is a desperate, blatant copy of Dark Souls. It really is. And I don't like to compare games, one for one to other ones, but this one is. So if you like Dark Souls, you will love this game. But it is so blatant in its execution, not only with the combat, but with the items, the leveling system, which you have to feed souls to Vulgrim, and in turn you can power up one of 3 stats. You can power up your health, you can power up your just regular attack, and then you can power up your arcane, which is like your magical abilities. So kind of going really far away from what 1 or 2 did, which is really sad to me. The combat is very, very much more intimate. So you gotta go 1 on 2 or 3 of these things, and you can't really fight a ton of guys at the same time. You even have a health item called the Nephilim's Respite, which is just like an Estus flask where you use it and you get multiple of them and you can replenish them over time. Thankfully, it's a little more forgiving in this game because you'll kill certain enemies and they'll give you like a green skull and it will come to you, and then you'll use that, or Lurcher. That's what the name of the currency is, I believe. And then that will power it back up for you. But you get like more of those as the game goes on. You start with like 1 or 2, and then it gets up to like 6, and then you can use that in your boss fights without having to use your various other items, which like you can do with, pop something for strength, so you have increased strength for a while, or increased fortification, so you don't take as much damage. But like all the combat is just Souls. It is very a reactive style of fighting. So in the past, these games, which I've liked about them, is that you can be aggressive because you're powerful. You're one of the horsemen. And in this game, you don't even get depowered. In the first game, you kind of have that, Metroid thing where you're like, I have all the power. And then after like 10 minutes, it's like, you're back to square one and you got to get your power back. And Darksiders 2 has a little bit of that as well. You got to like gain more power, but Fury is not hamstrung at all, but she gets more over time. And it's just really frustrating to me that one of the most powerful, warriors in this world is having a hard time fighting 2 or 3 skeletons. And maybe that's just me, but it's very much focused on dodging at the right time. It's very Bayonetta-esque, where if you dodge at the right time, it'll slow down and you can heal up in that moment, or you can do a counterattack and do a lot of damage. So there's a lot of counterattacking. Tons and tons of counterattacking. So if you like counterattacking, this is the game for you. But for me, it just was it was against everything that I really liked about the previous games, kind of moving in and like with War, you know, kind of like smashing into people. Like even in the very beginning, you can take these smaller enemies and he'll just pick them up and just crush them, like, you know, right away, because they're like little zombies. But in this one, it's like those zombies can kill you. But seeing the items on the ground, it looked just like a Souls game, and I kept looking for bonfires. And I'm a self-proclaimed not a huge fan of Souls. It kind of stresses me out, and I don't like it as much. And these games are about power fantasies to some degree, and this is the exact opposite of that. So it's really crushing to have to deal with that. And the sins themselves were, and there's one in particular that was a straight up clone of a very beloved Dark Souls boss, and I was like, you must be kidding me. Like, you can't just copy a game like that. And then on top of that, have a lot of technical issues. The technical issues come in mostly two forms. Texture pop in basically every cutscene. And what I mean by that is if they shoot in a moment from the camera from one person to the next, it will, like, the texture will come into them. Or if the monster jumps on screen and it'll show them, like, you'll see the details come in over time. And that's very frustrating, and it really takes you out of it. Even Ulthane, when you're just talking to him, seems like he's in a constant state of texture pop-in. It's very depressing. The other thing is that the game tends to freeze a lot and will load. So if you try to run past monsters and try to get to a boss, like you sometimes have to do in a Dark Souls game, because you have to get there, you don't want to collect any more souls, you just want to run to the boss. Or if you're just running through a level, there will be a ton of pauses. Now, I'm on Xbox One, but I've heard this problem is on PlayStation 4 as well. Maybe it's a console problem. But the fact that you get paused so frequently in this type of game, a single-player game like this, it's ridiculous. So basically, there are all these technical problems that kind of plague the game throughout, which really pull you out of the story. Not only are these things happening during the cutscenes, but they're happening actually during the gameplay. Like, these things, they just plague every single moment, and it really sucks. It's not an unplayable game by any stretch, but it's got those problems, and then it's just a straight-up copy and rip-off of another really big franchise. And I understand that. These games have always tried to manipulate and change with the times, but they kind of had an identity, something that I really loved. I loved the fact that it was like this Devil May Cry meets Zelda, and now it's just Dark Souls. The puzzles are not really there so much anymore. You know, one of the biggest highlights is traversing the world, and this game does have some fun stuff. For instance, like, if you put on the Force with the purple hair, like, you'll sink to the bottom of a water area, but if you put on the ice, you'll walk over water, and that's really cool. So that's a big highlight for sure, but that is just, like, so minor compared to the rest of it. So the combat is just so tired, and we've all seen it before. The technical issues are there, the story just seems so minuscule, and I get that this is them stepping back into the spotlight with this franchise, but it's just a shame that it wasn't in a bigger and better way. So, unless you're a huge fan of Darksiders, unless you're a pretty big fan of Dark Souls, I would say avoid this game. It is mediocre. And to kind of describe my feelings as a really big fan, I'm crestfallen. I was so looking forward to this. I couldn't wait to get back in the stirrups of a horseman. But to not even ride a horse, or to not really feel powerful the way a horseman should, it feels like a big missed opportunity. I think one of the best ways I can explain it is this. On the final boss, going into that last fight with Envy, I showed up at the Charred Council, I teleported in, and I ran around the whole room. I ran around for about 5 minutes until I realized that the boss didn't load. And there I was, the grand finale of this game, and it wasn't going to happen. So that's basically what this game is. It's beautiful looking in some respects. The Charred Council looks wonderful, and there are some really fun story things in here, along with some cool traversal, but it just feels like it falls short in a lot of ways. And that's why I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. Really, I considered going lower, but I think this game deserves a shot for those who might really, really be hardcore fans, but even then, I don't know if it's a full price game. It's just a lot of issues technically, and it just feels so lackluster in execution. It really does. There's some things that I like about it, and you can tell that I'm kind of like torn here, but like the music is good and some of the visuals are good, but it's just like they lost the combat and the style, the look of the place. Like it doesn't look truly like a full Darksiders game. You can tell even in the boss designs, there's something new or weird or off about them that doesn't really fit in with what the stuff in the past was. And I know adopting this style, especially without having Joe Madureira and that rest of that team be there, would be so difficult. But yeah, I'd pass on it probably. Either way, thank you so much for dropping by. If you want to support the channel, consider liking this video, subscribing to us here, or donating to us over on patreon.com/criticalreviews. And until next time, just remember to adapt and overcome.